I should start by saying I didn't believe in haunted houses. Not really. I like ghost stories the same way I like campfire tales, entertaining, maybe spooky in the moment, but nothing more. I didn't think places held on to the dead. I didn't think walls remembered things. That changed one night in late October when my girlfriend and I decided to spend a weekend in a rented mountain cabin. It was her idea. She found the listing online, an old cabin, deep in the woods, perched on the side of a ridge that overlooked the valley below. The pictures made it look almost romantic. Rough-hewn beams, a stone fireplace, lanterns instead of electric lights. Remote, quiet, private. The kind of place you think will recharge you. We'd been fighting a lot back then, about work, about money, about stupid little things that stack up when you're both stressed. So, when she suggested a getaway, I agreed without hesitation. I told myself it might help us reset. The drive took hours. The pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt, until finally, we reached a long path swallowed by pine trees. The cabin appeared suddenly between the trunks, its roof steep and dark with age, its windows staring blankly toward us. It looked older than I expected. Not just rustic, old. The wood was weather-beaten, the porch sagged, and the door leaned like it had swollen too many times in the rain. But the place was cheap, and the view from the porch was breathtaking. From up there, you could see the valley open wide, miles of forest, and the river glinting silver in the last light of day. Inside, the cabin smelled like dust and pine sap. The floorboards groaned with every step, and the walls were crowded with the kind of things that made you feel watched: old photographs, mounted antlers, shelves of books with cracked spines. There was no electricity, just an iron wood stove for heat and lanterns for light. I remember joking, "Feels like we stepped back in time." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She admitted later the place unsettled her the second we walked in, though she didn't want to ruin the trip. We settled in as the sun sank. She cooked while I hauled in firewood, and after we ate, we lit one of the lanterns and played cards at the table. For the first time in months, things felt easy between us. The only strange thing happened when I went outside to dump some scraps into the woods. The night was pitch black, no street lamps, no glow of town in the distance. Just the lantern glow leaking through the cabin windows behind me. As I stepped off the porch, I thought I heard something. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was a whisper. So soft, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Just the sound of the trees shifting against each other. I stood there for a long moment, holding my breath, listening. But the night was still, heavy, silent. I shook it off and went back inside. We turned in early. There was only one bedroom upstairs. The ceiling slanted low, and the bed sagged in the middle, but it was warm, and with the lantern flickering low on the nightstand, I felt almost safe. Almost. The first time it happened, I thought it was my imagination. We'd blown out the lantern, sinking the room into complete darkness. No glow from outside, no faint blue light from a phone, just black, the kind that presses against your eyelids. And then, from somewhere in that blackness, I heard it. My name, whispered, stretched thin, like breath slipping through teeth. I sat up fast, my heart hammering. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She was already sitting up. Her voice trembled. It said my name. The dark felt heavier after that. I reached out, fumbling for the lantern, my hands clumsy and shaking until I found the striker. When the flame bloomed, it painted the room in warm light again, and just like that, nothing. No sound, no presence. Just us, breathing too fast, staring at each other like maybe we were both losing our minds. We didn't talk much after that. Didn't want to feed it with words. We left the lantern burning low on the nightstand, even though it hissed and smoked, filling the room with the smell of oil. Somehow, we fell asleep. But the strange thing was, I dreamed of nothing. Usually I have vivid dreams, scenes, faces, sometimes nightmares. That night, there was nothing at all. Just black. Endless, suffocating black. When I woke, the lantern had burned out. The room was gray with morning light, and everything looked normal. Too normal, as if the night before had been a trick our tired brains played on us. That's what I told myself as we cooked breakfast. That's what I told her when she asked if I thought we should leave. No, I said, forcing a laugh. We just freaked ourselves out. It's an old cabin in the woods, creeks and drafts and all that. She didn't look convinced. Neither was I, but I wanted to believe it. Because if I admitted it wasn't in our heads, then I had to admit something else was in that cabin with us. Something that knew our names. The second day passed quietly. Too quietly. We hiked a little in the morning, trying to distract ourselves. The forest around the cabin was beautiful, towering pines, patches of yellowing aspen, the distant sound of the river below. But even in daylight, I felt uneasy. The woods pressed in on all sides, thick and watchful. Whenever we stopped walking, the silence seemed wrong, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Back at the cabin, we tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. We cooked, played cards again, read old books pulled from the shelves. The kind with spidery handwriting in the margins. But no matter what we did, our eyes kept drifting back to the lantern on the table. Neither of us mentioned it, but we both knew night was coming, and with it whatever had whispered to us. By dusk, clouds rolled in. The temperature dropped, and rain began to patter on the roof. I chopped wood outside while she cooked, and every time the axe cracked through a log, I swore I heard faint murmurs, carried just beneath the sound of rain. Too soft to make out, but enough to make me glance over my shoulder, scanning the tree line. Nothing was there. I went inside, trying not to bring the unease with me. But she felt it too. I could see it in the way she moved, restless, glancing toward the windows, jumping at every gust of wind. After dinner, we lit the lantern and sat near the fireplace, neither of us talking much. The storm deepened. Wind howled through the chimney, rain lashed the walls. The lantern flame guttered in the draft, throwing long, uneasy shadows across the room. Finally, she broke the silence. What if it happens again? Her voice was low, but I heard the tremor. It won't, I said automatically. It was just, I hesitated. Just our minds playing tricks. She stared into the fire. We both heard it, at the same time. It said our names. I had no answer for that. When it grew late, neither of us wanted to go upstairs, but exhaustion pulled at us. We left the lantern burning low again and lay down together, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. Hours seemed to pass in silence. The rain slowed, the wind faded, and the cabin settled into stillness. Just when I started to think we might make it through the night, it happened again. Not faint this time. Not far away. The whisper came from the corner of the room. It spoke her name first, clear and deliberate, the syllables stretched thin. She gasped, clutching my arm. Then it spoke mine. I scrambled upright, fumbling for the lantern. My hands shook so badly I nearly tipped it over, but when I cranked the flame higher, the corner was empty. Just wood walls, old and scarred. But the sound hadn't faded into the distance. It had cut off, like whoever whispered simply stopped, mid-breath, when the light came. We sat frozen, staring at that corner, afraid to even blink. Finally, she whispered, "We should leave. Right now." Her voice cracked, and I realized she was crying. Every rational part of me wanted to agree. But outside, the storm still churned, and the thought of driving down that twisting mountain road in the dark, in the rain, felt almost as dangerous as staying. "Let's just wait until morning," I said. "We'll pack up first thing." She didn't argue, but she didn't look at me either. We left the lantern burning bright the rest of the night. The shadows jittered across the walls, keeping us wide awake. I kept waiting, straining to hear the whisper again, but nothing came. It was almost worse, that silence. As if it was waiting. When dawn broke, I expected to feel relief. But instead, a heaviness hung in the air, like the cabin itself was holding us inside. We packed quickly, stuffing clothes into bags without folding them. She moved fast, frantic, but when I tried to open the front door, the latch jammed. At first, I thought the wood had swollen from the rain. But no matter how hard I pulled, the door wouldn't budge. "Try the back," she said, panic rising in her voice. I went to the kitchen door. Same thing, the handle turned, but the door stuck tight, as if nailed shut. We checked the windows, even tried forcing one open with the fire iron, but they wouldn't move either. Every exit, sealed as if the cabin itself refused to let us go. That's when the fear settled in fully, not sharp panic, but something colder. Something that said, we are not getting out of here until it decides we can. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Her lips moved soundlessly, like she was praying. I paced, running my hands over the walls, searching for some trick or mechanism, anything to explain it. But there was nothing. Just rough wood that creaked under my palms, faintly damp like it had absorbed last night's storm. Then I noticed something else. Near the baseboard, just under the bed, the wood looked darker, stained almost. I crouched, running my fingers along it, and when I pulled my hand back, it came away faintly sticky. Not water. Not sap. Something darker. Before I could say anything, she whispered, "Do you hear it?" I froze. At first, I thought she meant the storm outside, or the creak of the cabin. But then I went still, holding my breath, and I heard it too. Whispers. Not one voice this time, but several. Layered, overlapping, too many to count. They weren't coming from outside. They weren't drifting through the walls. They were inside the cabin with us. And they were growing louder. By the third night, the whispers no longer waited for darkness. They started faintly, as we tried to eat breakfast, soft murmurs under the scrape of forks on plates. We froze, staring at each other, and just like before, the moment we lit the lantern brighter, the sound cut off. But it came back an hour later. Louder. Clearer. The voices moved through the cabin like smoke, slipping under doors, curling through cracks in the walls. Sometimes they seemed to drift from the fireplace, as if seeping out of the chimney. Sometimes from the floor beneath us, as though the ground itself was whispering. It wasn't just our names anymore. It was fragments of words. Sentences that broke apart, half swallowed. Don't leave. Stay with us. The dark remembers. My girlfriend pressed her hands over her ears, rocking on the bed. It won't stop, she whispered. It won't stop. I tried shouting, slamming my fists against the wall. What do you want? But my voice felt small against that tide of murmurs. And the voices answered. Not with words I understood at first. A mess of syllables, rising and falling like dozens of mouths speaking at once. But as I strained to listen, patterns emerged. And then I realized they were mimicking me, repeating what I had just shouted, but twisted, warped. What do you want? Want. Want. My own voice echoed back at me, dragged out, distorted like it was passing through water. I staggered back, my chest tight. My girlfriend grabbed my hand. Her eyes were wild. Don't talk to it. Don't let it. Her words cut off. Because then the voices shifted again and began mimicking her. Her name, her laugh, even the sound of her crying. Hearing it from the walls was worse than anything before. It wasn't just whispers anymore, it was us. Pieces of us played back wrong. That was when I realized something horrible. Whatever was in that cabin, it wasn't just trying to scare us. It was learning us. The day stretched long, unbearable. We tried to sleep in shifts, But the voices never gave us peace. They would rise whenever one of us closed our eyes, pressing close, like they knew the exact moment we were weakest. I caught myself staring at the lantern more than once, my thoughts slipping somewhere dark. What would happen if it went out again? What would we see? What would we hear if we let the darkness have us fully? By evening, the air inside the cabin felt wrong, heavy, like the pressure before a storm, except there was no storm now. Just a weight that pressed down on our lungs and made every breath sharp. That was when we noticed something new. Scratches. At first, just a few, near the baseboards where the stains had been. Thin lines in the wood, like something clawed at it. But when I ran my fingers over them, they were fresh. Splinters curled upward from the gouges. The longer we looked, the more we saw. On the doorframe, along the banister, even across the ceiling beams. Long, jagged scratches that hadn't been there before. And then, as we stood staring at them, we heard it. Not whispers this time. Scratching. Slow. Deliberate. From inside the walls. My girlfriend screamed, and I dragged her toward the lantern, cranking the flame as high as it would go. The scratching stopped instantly, leaving only silence so sharp it rang in my ears. She clutched me, sobbing. It's in the walls. Oh God, it's in the walls. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't. Because the truth was, I could feel it too. Something was in there. Something that moved when the dark covered it. That night, we didn't even pretend to sleep. We sat at the table with the lantern between us, listening as the whispers rose and fell. Sometimes they grew so loud the wood vibrated beneath our palms. Other times they went soft, coaxing, almost tender, as if lulling us closer to the dark. At some point, I must have dozed because I woke to silence. The lantern was still burning, but low, so low the glass was nearly black with soot. My girlfriend sat across from me, her head bowed, her hair covering her face. For a moment, I thought she was asleep, but then she spoke. Her voice was flat, strange. They don't want us to leave. A chill ran through me. What did you say? Slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes caught the dim light. They looked wrong, distant, glazed. They said we should stay, that we belong here now. My mouth went dry. You hear them? She nodded, almost smiling. They talk to me when you're asleep. They tell me things, about the dark, about what happened here. My skin crawled. That's not you talking. Her smile widened, just a fraction. And then, in a voice that wasn't hers, a voice layered with whispers, she said, "Blow it out." I lurched back, knocking my chair over. My hand slammed against the lantern, nearly tipping it, but I caught it just in time. The voices erupted in the walls, furious, rising in a storm of sound. My girlfriend, or whatever was speaking through her, clutched her head and screamed. I held the lantern high, shaking, shouting over the roar. "You're not taking us. You hear me? You're not." And just like that, silence fell. The whispers cut off. The scratching stopped. She collapsed forward onto the table, gasping, sobbing herself again. We clung to each other, shaking, as the lantern hissed and smoke between us. But the silence wasn't mercy. It was waiting, holding its breath. For when the light finally went out, we had almost no oil left. By the fourth night, the lantern's hiss had become our only comfort, and every hour it burned lower, sputtering, threatening to die. I rationed it as best I could, turning the flame down until the cabin was barely visible, just shapes moving in a fog of dim yellow light. But it wasn't enough. I knew it wouldn't last until morning. And when it finally went out, we'd have nothing. My girlfriend, though by now she was more a shadow of herself, sat hunched near the bed. She hadn't spoken much since the voices tried to use her. When she did, her words came clipped, hesitant, as if she was afraid they'd twist out of her mouth. But that night, as the lantern guttered low, she whispered something that chilled me more than all the voices combined. They don't whisper to me anymore. I turned sharply. What do you mean? Her eyes lifted. They looked raw, bloodshot, exhausted. They don't have to. They're already inside. My stomach turned cold. I wanted to demand what she meant, but the lantern popped suddenly, the wick folding into itself, and the glass went black. The cabin plunged into darkness. At first, there was nothing but our breathing. Mine fast, ragged. Hers, almost calm. Then the whispers returned. Not from the walls, not from beneath the floor, but from everywhere. The air vibrated with them, thousands of voices at once, pouring through the dark. Some murmured low, others screamed in a soundless pitch that clawed at my skull. And beneath it all, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing the room toward us. I fumbled blindly, searching for the matches, the oil can, anything. My hands shook so violently I knocked something over. Glass shattered on the floor. Her voice cut through the dark, high and terrified. They're here. I struck a match, the tiny flame blooming against the black. For a split second, I saw the room, and I wished I hadn't. The walls were covered in scratches. Not dozens, hundreds. Long, ragged lines carved deep into the wood. The stains at the baseboards weren't just patches. They spread higher now, streaking up the walls like something seeping out from within. And in the far corner, where the light barely reached, the shadows moved. Not like smoke, not like tricks of the flame. They shifted with purpose, writhing against the walls, peeling themselves loose. The match burned down to my fingers. I dropped it with a hiss of pain. Darkness swallowed us again. And that's when I felt it. A hand, cold, brittle, pressing against my shoulder. I screamed, thrashing away, but there was nothing solid. Only whispers brushing against my skin, crawling into my ears, filling my head with words that weren't mine. Stay, stay, stay. My girlfriend cried out somewhere in the dark. I heard her stumbling, her hands scraping wood, her voice breaking as she called my name. But then, her voice doubled, once from her lips, and once from somewhere else in the room, perfectly mimicked. I spun toward the sound, blind, desperate. Where are you? More voices answered. Dozens of her. Dozens of me. All speaking at once, overlapping, impossible to separate. Laughter, sobbing, gasps, all our sounds, fed back at us until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I found the lantern by touch, my fingers slick with spilled oil. I shook it, begged it to catch, struck another match with shaking hands. The tiny flame kissed the wick, and for an instant, light returned. Enough to see them. Figures pressed against the walls. Not solid, not flesh, flat, like shadows painted wrong. Dozens, maybe more, their outlines shifting, melting into each other. Their faces. God. Their faces were hollows, stretched wide in whispers, mouths moving without sound. And then, as the lantern flared higher, they all turned their heads at once. Toward us. The flame sputtered. Oil drained fast, too fast. My girlfriend screamed, clawing at me, begging not to let it die. But it did. The light went out. What happened in the dark after that is harder to explain. I remember weight, pressure, like being crushed underwater, pulled down into something bottomless. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Voices poured into me, not from outside, but from inside my skull. They knew every thought, every memory, every fear. They spoke in my father's voice, my mother's, even hers. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds, hours. Time dissolved in that dark. When I woke, the gray light of dawn was leaking through the window. I was lying on the floor, the lantern tipped on its side beside me. My throat was raw from screaming. My hands and arms were torn with splinters, as if I'd clawed the floor. And she was gone. The bed was empty. The cabin silent, no sign of struggle, no footprints, nothing. Just gone, as if the darkness had swallowed her whole. I stumbled to the door, hardly believing it when the latch gave way and swung open easily. Morning air rushed in, cold and damp. The forest outside was quiet, still, normal. I don't remember the drive down the mountain. I don't remember how I got home. What I do remember, what I'll never forget, is that when I finally closed my eyes in my own bed, in my own apartment miles away, I heard it again. A whisper. Right against my ear. My name. I've never been the type of person to buy into ghost stories. When people talk about haunted houses, cursed places, or things they've seen in the dark, I usually roll my eyes. I grew up rational. My dad was the kind of man who would tell me, if you hear a noise in the night, it's either the wind or the house settling. That's it. I believed that, and I carried that certainty with me through most of my life. But there are some things I can't explain away anymore. This happened almost 2 years ago. I can tell you the date exactly, because it's burned into my memory, October 17th. We were a small group of friends, 4 of us in total. There was me, Daniel, and then Hannah and Marcus. We'd all gone to college together and stayed close afterward. It was Marcus's idea that started all of this. He had this old beat-up SUV and an obsession with abandoned places. He'd take us on weekend trips sometimes, driving out into the middle of nowhere to poke around in forgotten barns or empty motels along the highway. Most of the time it was just harmless fun, creepy in the moment, but nothing dangerous. That night was supposed to be the same. Marcus had heard about a cabin up in the mountains, about a 2-hour drive from where we lived. According to him, it had been built in the 1940s by a man who vanished without explanation. After that, the property supposedly changed hands a few times, but people never stayed long. Eventually, it was abandoned. Local kids, he said, dared each other to go up there and spend the night. There were rumors, voices in the walls, strange lights in the windows, even people who claimed to see someone watching from inside when the place was supposed to be empty. It sounded like the perfect setup for one of Marcus's haunted trips. I remember sitting in the passenger seat of his SUV, Hannah and Daniel squeezed into the back. The road curled upward into the mountains. Nothing but black pines on either side of us, the headlights carving out a narrow tunnel of light. Marcus was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning, telling the story again, hyping it up. "You know what they say about this place?" he said, tapping the steering wheel. "If you take a picture inside the cabin, sometimes it shows. More people than you started with." Hannah groaned, shoving his shoulder. "Don't say it like that. You're just trying to freak us out." "Good," Marcus said. "That's the point." Daniel didn't say much. He was the quietest out of all of us, always hanging back, but I could see him staring out the window with this uneasy look. The truth was, I wasn't scared. Not yet. I'd been on enough of these trips to know that most haunted places are just old, drafty buildings where your imagination fills in the blanks. Still, as we climbed higher into the mountains, something about the road felt different. There were no houses, no signs of life at all, just miles of trees and the narrow strip of asphalt. My phone had lost service 20 minutes earlier. It was like we'd driven out of the world and into some forgotten corner where nothing lived. When we finally pulled off onto a dirt path, the tires crunching over gravel, I saw the cabin for the first time. It was smaller than I expected, hunched beneath the trees, its roof sagging in the middle like the weight of years was too much for it. The wood siding was dark with rot, and one of the shutters dangled loose, creaking in the wind. No lights, no sound, just a shell of a building swallowed by the forest. "Home sweet home," Marcus said, putting the SUV in park. We piled out, each of us grabbing backpacks. The air was colder up there, sharp with the smell of pine and damp earth. I could hear Hannah mutter, "This feels wrong," under her breath, but Marcus was already marching ahead, crunching up the path toward the cabin. The front door was warped, the handle rusted. He gave it a push, and with a groan of old wood, it swung open. The darkness inside felt thick, heavier than it should have been, as if the cabin was holding its breath, waiting. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the room. Dust floated in the air like drifting ash. The floorboards were scuffed, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper that had once been patterned, but was now just colorless shreds. There was a fireplace at the far end, empty and black. A single chair sat near the wall, tipped slightly as if someone had left in a hurry. "Creepy," Hannah whispered, hugging herself. Marcus grinned. "Perfect." We set up in the main room, unrolling sleeping bags on the floor and dropping our backpacks in a pile. There was a strange excitement in the air, that nervous kind of laughter people get when they know they're doing something they shouldn't. Marcus suggested we take a picture right away, just to set the tone. We all gathered near the fireplace, him holding his phone out in front of us. The beam of my flashlight lit our faces, casting long shadows up the wall. I remember Hannah leaning in close, smiling nervously, and Daniel standing stiff with his hands shoved in his pockets. Marcus snapped the picture. We didn't look at it right away. Not then. Instead, we made a circle on the floor, lit a couple of candles, and started talking, mostly joking, telling ghost stories, daring each other to go peek into the back rooms of the cabin. For the first hour or so, it felt like every other one of our adventures. Just us, being idiots in an abandoned place. But as the night went on, the cabin began to feel less like a backdrop and more like something watching us. The air grew colder, even though the candles burned steadily. The wood creaked in the walls, not like settling, but like footsteps shifting just out of sight. And then, around midnight, Marcus finally checked the picture he'd taken. The second I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. He didn't laugh. He didn't try to scare us. His grin just faded, and he went pale. "What?" I asked. He turned the screen toward us. There we were, 4 of us huddled together near the fireplace. But in the middle, between Hannah and me, was another face. A 5th figure, grinning. And I swear to you, on everything I know, there had been no one else in that cabin. For a long moment, no one said anything. We just stared at the phone screen, at that 5th figure wedged between us. The image wasn't blurry. It wasn't a trick of light or a smear on the lens. You could see him clearly, a man, maybe in his 30s, with pale skin and hollow cheeks. His eyes seemed too dark, too deep, and that grin, it didn't look natural. It stretched wide, pulling at his face in a way that made my stomach knot. He wasn't leaning in the way the rest of us were. He was standing there, stiff and straight, like he belonged, like he'd always been part of the group. Hannah let out this broken laugh and shoved Marcus's arm. "You edited that." "Don't even try." But Marcus just shook his head, his mouth tight. "I didn't touch it. I swear." Daniel leaned forward, squinting. His voice was low, flat. "That's not funny." I wanted to believe it was some kind of glitch, a weird reflection, anything. But the more I looked at that face, the more wrong it felt. The stranger's shoulders were slightly behind ours, like he'd been standing in the room, right there with us. "Maybe someone was outside," I said quickly. "Someone slipped in, and we didn't notice." "No," Marcus cut me off. I took it on selfie mode. The door's behind me. Nobody could have been there. We fell silent. The candles flickered, making our shadows lurch across the walls. Hannah grabbed her backpack. No, I'm not doing this. Let's go." But Marcus blocked her. "Wait, we can't just leave." "Why not?" she snapped. "You saw it." "Exactly," he said, his eyes wide, almost excited. "This is real. This is proof." That word, proof, made my skin crawl. He sounded thrilled, like he'd found treasure instead of whatever that was. Marcus, I said quietly, this isn't funny anymore. He shook his head, clutching the phone like it was gold. Do you understand what this means? People talk about ghosts, but no one ever gets pictures like this. This is once-in-a-lifetime stuff. Hannah zipped her bag with shaking hands. I don't care. I'm leaving. But she didn't move. None of us did. Because at that exact moment, the cabin creaked again. Not the groan of old wood. Not the wind outside. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing the room above us. Except there was no upstairs. The four of us froze. My mouth went dry. I wanted to tell myself it was an animal, a raccoon or something in the roof beams, but no animal moves like that. Each step pressed down, heavy, paced like a man walking across a floor. Daniel whispered, "Tell me you heard that." We all nodded. The sound stopped. Silence pressed in around us. Marcus tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin, shaky. Old houses make noises. No house makes that noise, Hannah said. She was trembling now, her arms wrapped around herself. I lifted my flashlight and aimed it at the ceiling. The beam picked out cobwebs and dust, cracks in the wood, but no movement. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something up there had frozen too, listening, waiting. Marcus lowered his voice, as if speaking too loud might bring it back. Maybe we should check the other rooms. Just to be sure. None of us wanted to, but the alternative was sitting there, waiting. So we moved together, 4 flashlights cutting into the dark, our footsteps loud against the warped boards. The cabin had 3 rooms beyond the main one. A narrow kitchen, empty except for rusted pipes and an overturned table. A small bedroom with a broken bed frame, and a back room that looked like it had once been for storage, though it was bare now except for a few planks leaning against the wall. Every corner was thick with dust. No footprints but ours. No sign of anyone else. But the air felt wrong. Like when you walk into a place right after an argument and the tension is still there, heavy and invisible. Daniel stopped in the doorway of the storage room. Did you guys feel that? Feel what? I asked. He shook his head, rubbing his arms. Like the temperature dropped. Just in here. I stepped inside. The chill wrapped around me instantly, sinking into my skin. The hair on my arms rose. The others felt it too. You could see it in their faces. Okay, Hannah whispered. I'm done. I don't care. I'm leaving. She turned back toward the main room, and we followed quickly, nobody wanting to be last. When we got back to the fireplace, something was different. The chair. The old wooden chair that had been pressed against the wall when we arrived was now sitting in the center of the room, facing us. None of us had touched it. Hannah gasped. Marcus's grin faltered. Daniel swore under his breath. For a long, breathless moment, none of us moved. The chair seemed to wait, patient, as though someone had just dragged it there and sat down, watching. I don't know why I did it, maybe to prove to myself it was just a trick, but I raised my flashlight and swept it across the floor. That's when I saw them. Faint, almost invisible in the dust. Footprints. Bare, human footprints leading from the corner of the room to the chair. They weren't ours. We all backed away at once, our sleeping bags forgotten, our bags still scattered. Marcus whispered, "It's him." The cabin creaked again. This time, it came from directly behind the fireplace, like someone shifting their weight, waiting for us to notice. Hannah broke. She bolted for the door, yanking it open. Cold night air rushed in. I'm not staying another second. But when she stepped onto the porch, she froze. What? Marcus hissed. She didn't answer. She just stood there, her body stiff. I moved to the doorway beside her, shining my light out into the trees. And that's when I saw it. Not a man. Not an animal. Something else. A pale figure standing just beyond the edge of the trees, still as stone, watching the cabin. It looked like the face in the photo. And when my light touched it, it smiled. Hannah's scream cut through the trees. She stumbled backward into me, her flashlight tumbling from her hand and clattering across the porch. The pale figure didn't move. It just stood at the tree line, that awful grin stretched wide as if it had been waiting for us to notice it. For a second, my mind scrambled for excuses. Maybe it was another hiker. Maybe someone had followed us up here. But deep down, I knew. The same way you know when a nightmare isn't just a dream, you feel it. Marcus raised his light, but the beam seemed weaker than it should have been, swallowed by the night. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracking. "Who's there?" The figure didn't answer. It tilted its head slightly, like it was curious. And then, as we watched, it stepped backward, not turning, not breaking eye contact, until the dark swallowed it completely. Daniel grabbed Hannah's arm. "We're leaving. Now." We rushed inside, scooping up our bags in frantic silence. Marcus was muttering under his breath, "I got it on camera. I swear I got it. I swear," like he was possessed by the idea of proof. But when we tried the door again, it wouldn't budge. Marcus yanked at the handle. I tried too. The old wood groaned but refused to move, as if something pressed against it from the outside. "We came through this door," Hannah shouted. "It was fine before." Panic clawed at my chest. I hurried to the back of the cabin. There was a window in the storage room, small but big enough to squeeze through. I shoved my backpack against the frame, tried to push it open. Nothing. The window wouldn't give an inch. I pounded at the glass until my hand ached, but it didn't even crack. Daniel appeared in the doorway, pale as chalk. "The windows don't open." It was true. Every one of them was sealed shut, like the cabin itself had decided we weren't allowed to leave. Hannah slid down against the wall, burying her face in her hands. "We're stuck. Oh my God, we're stuck in here." For the next hour, we tried everything, kicking at the door, prying at the frames with pieces of wood, even trying to force open the rotten floorboards near the walls. But nothing worked. It wasn't just old nails and wood keeping us in. It felt deliberate, like something wanted us trapped. The air grew colder as the night stretched on. Our breath fogged in the beams of our flashlights. The candles had all gone out, snuffed one by one, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burnt wax. And then the noises started again. At first, faint. The shuffle of footsteps where no one stood. The creak of the chair shifting by itself. The low groan of the rafters, not from weight, but from something moving above us. Daniel gripped his flashlight so tightly I thought it might snap. "It's in here with us." "Don't say that," Hannah whispered. But I knew he was right. The cabin wasn't empty anymore. Marcus, to my disbelief, was still clinging to his phone. He stared at the photo again and again, zooming in on the grinning face like it would give him answers. "He wants us to see him," Marcus muttered. "That's why he showed up. He wants to be remembered." "Shut up," Hannah hissed. "Just shut up." She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. I sat beside her, but what comfort could I offer? Every part of me wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The cabin groaned again, louder this time. From the shadows near the fireplace, something shifted. I swung my flashlight toward it and froze. The chair was no longer in the center of the room. It was closer. Just a few feet from where we sat, angled toward us. Hannah let out a broken sob. I kept the beam fixed on the chair, half expecting it to move again under the light. But it didn't. It just waited. And then, faint but clear, I heard breathing. Not ours. Deeper. Slower. Coming from the empty air just beside the chair. Marcus's grin twitched back onto his face. "Do you hear that?" He's here." Hannah slapped the phone out of his hands. It clattered across the floor. "Stop talking like that. You're making it worse." The phone landed face up, the screen still glowing. The photo was open, but the image wasn't the same anymore. We all saw it at once. The fifth figure was closer now. His face filled the screen, grinning wide, as if he'd stepped right up to the lens. And in the faint glow of that screen, something stirred in the corner of the room. It leaned out of the shadows. A pale face, too long, too sharp, the same grin carved wide across its mouth. The same face from the picture. It was crouched in the corner like it had been there all along, waiting for us to notice. My throat locked. Hannah screamed. Daniel swung his flashlight toward it, but the beam only caught empty wall. The corner was bare. But the chair had moved again. Now it sat between us and the door. Daniel grabbed Marcus by the collar. "We're leaving. I don't care if I have to break the wall down. We're getting out of here." He shoved Marcus toward the storage room. We all followed, frantic, our flashlights darting in wild beams. But when we reached the back, something slammed the door shut behind us. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Hannah screamed again, pounding at the wood. The handle rattled uselessly. We were trapped in the storage room, 4 flashlights slicing through the dark. That's when we heard it, right on the other side of the door. Footsteps, slow, steady, moving toward us. And then, the handle turned. The handle twisted. We froze, our flashlights jerking toward the door as it shuddered in its frame. First slow, deliberate turns, like someone was testing it, and then harder, faster, rattling against the wood. Hannah pressed her back against the wall, whispering, "Please no, please no, please no." Daniel raised a broken piece of wood he'd yanked from the floor, clutching it like a weapon. His knuckles were white, his jaw locked. Marcus stood rigid, his eyes darting between the door and his phone, as if he couldn't decide which mattered more. The handle stopped moving. Silence! Then 3 knocks. Sharp, precise, echoing through the small room. I swear my heart stopped. It wasn't random banging. It was deliberate. 1, 2, 3. The knocks faded into quiet, but the silence that followed was worse. My ears strained for every sound. All I could hear was Hannah's ragged breathing, the faint buzz of our flashlights. And then, soft as breath against the wood, a voice. It whispered my name. Not Hannah's, not Daniel's, not Marcus's. Mine. Low, mocking, like someone who already knew me. My stomach turned to ice. I didn't answer, couldn't. I just stared at the door, praying it wouldn't open. Daniel whispered, "We can't stay in here. If it gets in." As if the word summoned it, the door jolted violently. The wood cracked. The whole frame shook like something was ramming it from the other side. "Move!" Daniel shoved us back. He raised the piece of wood high, ready to swing. But then the banging stopped. And we realized, together, the sound wasn't at the door anymore. It was inside. Something scraped across the floorboards behind us, a dragging sound, slow and steady, like bare feet against wood. We spun around, flashlights slicing through the dust. In the farthest corner of the storage room, where the wall met the floor, a shape was pulling itself out of the darkness. First a hand, long, pale fingers, nails cracked and dirty. Then a shoulder, a head, the grin stretching across its face like a wound. It crawled forward on all fours, its body too long, its limbs bending at strange angles. Hannah screamed. Marcus stumbled back against the wall. Daniel swung the wood, but the thing was fast. It lunged into the beam of my flashlight, and for the first time, I saw its eyes. Black, bottomless, and yet staring straight into me like it had known me forever. I swung my flashlight, but the beam flickered, sputtered, the batteries dying at the worst possible moment. Darkness swallowed half the room. The creature's grin widened. It rushed at us. Chaos erupted. Daniel swung, the wood splintering against the wall. Hannah bolted toward the door, slamming her fists against it, sobbing. Marcus dropped his phone, and it skittered across the floor. I grabbed it without thinking. The screen was still glowing, the photo still open. But it wasn't frozen anymore. The figures were moving. The four of us were there in the picture, frozen in our smiles. But the fifth figure was leaning forward now, closer, its grin widening as if pressing against the glass. And then, I swear this is true, its eyes shifted. They weren't looking at the group anymore. They were looking at me, holding the phone in the dark. I hurled the phone across the room. It hit the wall and cracked, the screen going black. The creature shrieked. Not like an animal, not like a man, something in between, high-pitched and broken, a sound that made my bones ache. The door behind us blew open, as if the pressure holding it shut finally snapped. Cold air rushed in. Run! Daniel shoved us through the fray. We sprinted, stumbling through the cabin, our lights flickering wildly. The chair was back in the center of the room, waiting, but we vaulted over it, our footsteps pounding against the boards. The front door was wide open now, swinging in the wind. We didn't stop to question it. We burst out onto the porch, into the freezing night. The forest loomed around us, black and endless, but I didn't care. I just ran. Branches clawed at my face, roots caught my shoes, but I didn't stop. None of us did. We didn't stop until the cabin was gone, swallowed by the trees behind us. We made it back to the road at dawn. My legs were bleeding, my hands raw from grabbing at branches. Hannah collapsed against the SUV, sobbing uncontrollably. Daniel leaned over, gasping for breath. Marcus just stared back into the trees, pale and hollow-eyed. When we finally drove away, nobody spoke. The silence was heavier than anything. We didn't go to the police. What could we say? That a ghost locked us inside a cabin and crawled out of the walls? They would have laughed in our faces. I thought maybe we'd move on, pretend it never happened. But we didn't. We couldn't. Hannah won't talk about that night at all. Daniel moved away a few months later. And Marcus. Marcus is worse. He went back for the phone. 2 weeks later, he texted me a photo. It was blurry, dark, but I could see what he wanted me to. The cracked screen still glowing, still showing that image of us at the fireplace. Only now, there were 6 figures. Marcus was gone. And standing where he should have been was the grinning man, his head tilted, his hand resting on my shoulder. That was the last time I heard from him. I don't tell this story for thrills. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just know that if you ever find yourself near that cabin, don't go inside. Don't take a picture. Because once he's in the photo with you, it means he's already there. I don't know why I agreed to that trip. Maybe it was the fact that we were all pushing 30 and we hadn't done anything together in years. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was guilt. Whatever the reason, when Ryan sent that group text, "One last weekend together," I found a cabin in the woods. Just us. No phones, no distractions. I said yes without thinking. The drive up was already unsettling. The further north we went, the more the trees swallowed the sky. The roads narrowed, cracked, and twisted like they didn't want to be found. By the time we turned off the main highway, my GPS had long since stopped working, and I felt that strange kind of nervousness you get when you know you're leaving behind anything familiar. There were 5 of us. Ryan, who organized the whole thing. Chris, the loud one, always joking. Mark, quiet but sharp-eyed. Emma, who used to be my closest friend back in college. And me. I'll leave my name out, if that's okay. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, half hidden behind a wall of evergreens. From the outside, It looked like something out of a hunting magazine. Heavy logs, a sagging roof, shutters that probably hadn't been touched in decades. A place for deer hunters, maybe, or fishermen. Not for us. Still, Ryan was grinning when we unloaded the car. "Come on," he said. "Tell me this isn't perfect." I didn't answer. Perfect wasn't the word I'd use. The cabin didn't just look old, it looked abandoned. The porch boards sagged when we stepped on them, and the door took 2 hard pushes before it gave way with a sigh like it was waking up. Inside, the air was cold, stale, with that faint animal smell wood gets after too many winters without heat. The furniture was all there, a heavy wooden table, chairs, a sofa whose stuffing had collapsed on one side. The fireplace was stacked with wood, though I couldn't tell how long it had been sitting there. And the walls. That was the first thing I noticed. Every wall was lined with photographs. Hundreds of them. Old frames, some cracked, some leaning crooked. All black and white, maybe mid-1900s. Hunters posing with deer slung from beams. Men with rifles standing in the snow. Groups gathered around the same fireplace we were standing in front of. At first, it seemed almost charming, like we'd stepped into someone's forgotten scrapbook. But the longer I looked, the stranger it felt. None of the faces were smiling. Not one. Just blank expressions, eyes sharp and fixed on the camera like they were being told not to move. Chris broke the silence. "Jesus," he said. "This is creepy as hell. It's like a taxidermy museum, but for people." Ryan laughed it off. "It's character. We wanted old school, didn't we?" We unpacked, pretending not to notice the photos anymore, though I caught Emma staring at them more than once. The first couple of hours were fine. We got the fire going, cracked open some beers, played cards at the table. For a while it felt almost normal. The kind of weekend Ryan had promised. But then, around 9, Mark said something that stopped us cold. "Hey, did any of you move this picture?" We looked over. He was pointing at a frame above the fireplace. It had shown a group of hunters earlier. I remembered it clearly, the one with 4 men in heavy coats. But now, there were 5. And the 5th one was blurry, half turned toward the camera. Chris frowned. "You're messing with us." Mark shook his head. "I swear, I was looking at this one before dinner. There were 4 guys, not 5. Ryan shrugged it off. "Maybe you missed it." But I hadn't. I remembered the photo too. The space between the men had been empty before. Now it wasn't. Emma whispered, "That's not possible." We laughed it off eventually, because what else were we supposed to do? We blamed the firelight, the drinks, our imaginations. We moved on. But I couldn't stop glancing at that photograph, and every time I did, it felt like the blurry figure was more in focus than before. By midnight, the cabin had gone quiet. The fire had burned down to embers. Ryan was asleep on the couch. Chris snored from a sleeping bag on the floor. Mark and Emma had taken the bedrooms. I couldn't sleep. The silence pressed too hard, and the walls seemed to lean closer with all those faces staring down. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and that's when I noticed something else. Another photograph had changed. On the far wall, halfway hidden behind a lamp, there was a picture of a single man sitting at the cabin's table. Only now, there was more detail than before. A bottle. Cards on the table. The same game we'd been playing hours earlier. And the man in the photo. He looked exactly like Chris. I stared at that photograph until my eyes watered. It was Chris. Same jawline, same messy hair, even the same plaid shirt he'd been wearing all night. He was frozen at the table in the picture, his hand mid-motion with a card. But what made my stomach drop was his expression. He wasn't laughing or teasing or drunk like he had been earlier. He looked vacant. His eyes weren't on the cards at all. They were staring straight at me. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence. some hunter in the 1940s who happened to look like Chris. But I knew better. I'd seen the original photo. Hours earlier, the man at the table hadn't been there at all. I looked over at Chris, sprawled out on the floor in his sleeping bag. He was breathing loud and steady, oblivious. For a second, I wanted to wake him, shove the frame in his face, make him confirm what I already knew. But something held me back. A heaviness, like the cabin itself was listening. Instead, I sat there in the half-dark, trying not to look at the walls. Trying not to let my eyes wander from photo to photo, because every time they did, I thought I saw small differences. A hand in a new position. A figure standing further forward. A background detail that hadn't been there before. I must have dozed off sitting up, because the next thing I remember was waking to the sound of footsteps. Not heavy, deliberate footsteps. These were light, uneven, almost like someone pacing. I froze, eyes still half shut, listening. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't upstairs. It was in the room with me. I turned my head. Chris was still asleep. Ryan was motionless on the couch. The footsteps went on, slow and steady, until they stopped right in front of the fireplace. And then came a faint creak, like a frame shifting on the wall. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Eventually, exhaustion overpowered fear, and at some point I drifted back into a shallow, restless sleep. The next morning, sunlight did little to make the cabin feel better. If anything, the light made the photos stand out sharper, clearer, like the faces had been waiting all night to be seen again. I wanted to say something at breakfast, but how? Hey guys, did you notice the photos are changing on their own? And by the way, Chris, you're in one now. No, they'd laugh, or worse, they'd see I was serious and the mood would crack wide open. But it turned out I didn't have to say anything. It was Emma. She was the first to notice. She said, staring at the far wall. Has this always been here? We turned. She was pointing at the same photo I'd seen last night, the one of Chris at the table. Only now, it wasn't just Chris. There were two people in the picture, Chris and Mark, both seated at the table, both with that same empty stare. Okay, that's messed up, Ryan muttered. I don't remember that at all. Chris barked a laugh, but it came out too forced. What the hell, man? Someone screwing with us. No one's screwing with us, Emma said. Her voice was sharp, brittle. Look at their clothes. That's what you're wearing right now. Silence. Mark shifted uncomfortably, pulling at his shirt like maybe it would change the photo somehow. Ryan tried to lighten the mood. It's just some trick. Maybe these old photos fade weird, or photos don't add people, Emma snapped. The room felt heavy again, the fire's crackle the only sound. I finally spoke up. I saw it last night. First it was just Chris. Now it's both of them. They all turned to look at me, and in their faces I saw it, the thing I'd been dreading. Fear. We didn't say much after that. We busied ourselves outside for most of the day, chopping firewood, hiking down to the stream, anything to get out of that suffocating cabin. But the unease followed us, like the forest itself was watching. By dusk, we were back inside, the cold chasing us to the fire. And of course, that's when Chris decided to confront it head on. All right, he said, beer in hand, standing in front of the wall. Which one of you is screwing with the pictures? Be honest. No one answered. He scanned our faces. Come on. Someone printed these, swapped them out, whatever. Right? That's all it is. Again, silence. Chris laughed, but his voice cracked. Fine. Whatever. If these things want to keep updating, let's see what they show next. He raised his bottle like a toast to the wall, and then Mark noticed it. Another photo. Smaller, near the corner. One none of us had paid attention to before. It showed a group of men standing in the cabin doorway. Except now, there were figures in the background. 5 of them. Us. Not just resembling us. Same clothes, same stances. Standing in the exact positions we were in at that very moment. Emma gasped. I felt my throat close. Ryan stood abruptly. That's it. We're leaving. But we didn't. Not right away. Because just as he said it, the lamp flickered, the fire hissed. And across the walls, one by one, every photograph shivered in its frame. Like they were breathing. We should have left right then, packed our bags, braved the dark, walked the 5 miles of dirt road if we had to. But we didn't. Nobody wanted to admit how scared they were, and no one wanted to be the first to break. So instead, we sat there in silence while the walls seemed to lean closer, lined with hundreds of unblinking eyes. The fire popped and spat. Every time a frame creaked, I felt my skin tighten. Ryan finally spoke. Okay, listen, we're tired. We've been drinking. I don't know what it is, but it's not supernatural. No one answered him, even he didn't sound like he believed it. Emma got up and went to the corner, to the photo of the 5 of us. She leaned close, squinting at it like if she studied hard enough she could undo what she was seeing. Her voice was low. That's me. That's my coat. That's. She touched the glass. My face. Stop it, Chris muttered. He stood too, pacing in front of the fireplace. We're freaking ourselves out over nothing. Old photos, weird lighting, pareidolia, whatever the word is. Our brains are filling in blanks. Chris, I said quietly. I saw it before. It was just you. Then you and Mark. Now all of us. You can't tell me that's nothing. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. That night, sleep was impossible. We took turns pretending to rest, but the truth was, no one trusted their eyes closed. The silence between us was heavier than the dark. At some point, I heard Emma whisper, "Do you hear that?" We all froze. At first, I thought she meant the fire. Then I heard it too. A faint, rhythmic clicking, like nails on wood, coming from the walls. Ryan grabbed a lantern and held it up. The light swept across the photos, and for a second, I thought the faces moved. Not the whole face, just the eyes, following us. The clicking grew louder, faster. A sound like tiny taps racing around the perimeter of the cabin. I swear I felt it vibrating through the floorboards. Stop, Emma whispered, covering her ears. Make it stop. Ryan stormed to the nearest frame and ripped it off the wall. The nails squealed as it came free, the photo clattering to the floor. But behind it was another photograph. Not even hung, just there, fused into the wood. And it was newer, clearer. This one showed Ryan, standing with a lantern in his hand, eyes wide. Exactly as he looked in that moment. He dropped it like it burned. The clicking stopped. By morning, none of us could pretend anymore. The photos were changing, rearranging, multiplying. And every time we looked, they were more detailed, more specific. Chris was the first to crack. He shoved his stuff into his bag, muttering under his breath. Nope, I'm not staying here another damn night. Chris, Ryan started, but Chris cut him off. You saw it. You all saw it. Those pictures aren't. They're not old. They're us. And I don't care if I have to walk 20 miles. I'm leaving. No one stopped him. Truth is, I envied him. He slammed the door behind him, and the silence that followed was worse than any sound. We waited. Minutes dragged by. 10, 20. No footsteps on the dirt road, no voice calling back. Just silence. Finally, Emma whispered, "Shouldn't we have heard him by now?" Mark stood, went to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. He froze. His breath caught. "What?" Ryan demanded. Mark didn't move, didn't speak. I went to the window beside him, and my stomach dropped. Chris was still there, not walking down the road, not storming off into the woods. He was standing just at the tree line, facing the cabin, perfectly still. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and fixed on the window. I jerked back, heart hammering. It's him. He's just standing there. Ryan pushed past us to look, but when he did, the clearing was empty. No, I said. I swear he was there. And then Emma's voice, trembling. Guys, look. She pointed to the far wall. A new photograph had appeared. Chris, standing in the tree line, staring at the cabin. Exactly what I had just seen. We didn't leave after that. Maybe we should have. Maybe that was our last chance. But fear does strange things. It traps you. We couldn't bring ourselves to step outside. The cabin was bad, but the woods felt worse. The rest of the day passed in fragments. We spoke little. We ate nothing. The only sound was the occasional pop of the fire and the faint groan of wood settling. By nightfall, the photos had changed again. Now they showed us sleeping. Our own bodies in our bags, our heads on the floor. Poses we hadn't taken yet. It felt like a countdown. Emma was crying softly by the window when she whispered something I'll never forget. They're not photos, she said. They're predictions. That night, none of us dared to close our eyes. At some point, maybe after midnight, Ryan stood and said he was going to check outside for Chris. He grabbed the lantern again, jaw set, and ignored Emma's plea not to go. The door creaked open, spilling firelight into the trees. He stepped out, and the darkness swallowed him. The door shut. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. And then the sound returned. Not footsteps. Not clicking. Knocking. Slow, deliberate, against the walls. First one side, then the other. Wrapping the cabin like a hand around a box. Emma buried her face in her knees. Mark stared at the floor, whispering prayers under his breath. I couldn't move. My eyes drifted back to the walls, to the endless grid of frames. And there, near the fireplace, a new one gleamed in the firelight. Ryan! Standing in the clearing, lantern in hand. But this time, his throat was cut wide open. None of us spoke after that. What could we say? Ryan wasn't coming back. Deep down, we all knew it. The fire burned low, shadows crawling up the walls. Every photo seemed alive, leaning forward, waiting. The faces no longer looked like strangers from another time. They looked like us. And not just us dead. Emma's quiet sobs broke the silence. Mark tried to comfort her, but his hands shook so badly it looked like he was the one about to break. I sat frozen, watching the walls, afraid to blink in case they changed again. Because they would. They always did. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost meaning. Then, suddenly, Emma stood. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't just sit here. Before I could stop her, she pulled the door open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth. Emma, Mark started, but she was already outside. The door swung shut behind her. We held our breath, listening. No scream, no footsteps, just silence. And then, faintly, the creak of a frame shifting on the wall. I turned slowly, already knowing what I'd see. A new photograph. Emma. Her body hanging from a tree branch, head tilted, eyes lifeless. Mark choked on a sob and stumbled back. No. But the photo didn't change. It stayed there, sharp and cruel. I pressed my hands to my face. We were trapped in something we couldn't fight, couldn't run from. The photos weren't just recording us, they were dictating us, writing our endings. Mark snapped. He grabbed the lantern and stormed to the nearest wall, ripping frames down one after another. They crashed to the floor, glass shattering, wood splintering. He tore them off in fistfuls, shouting, "We're not part of this. We're not." I wanted to stop him. I wanted to tell him it wouldn't matter. But I didn't. Because when he tore down the last row of frames, behind them was something worse. The wall wasn't wood anymore. It was black and glossy, like a mirror. And reflected in it was the cabin. And us. But not us as we were, us as we would be. Mark's reflection stood with blood pouring from his chest, a hole ripped through his shirt. Emma's reflection hung from a tree. Ryan's lay in the clearing, throat open. Chris's stood at the window, eyes gone. And me. I stared at my own reflection. I was slumped against the fireplace, my skin pale, my throat dark with bruises. Like something had strangled the life out of me. Mark screamed and hurled the lantern at the wall. The glass exploded, fire spilling across the floor. The reflection didn't burn. It only flickered. And in that flicker, Mark's reflection moved. It stepped forward, separate from him, hand reaching through the black surface. He didn't even have time to scream. The hand closed around his chest, and when he collapsed, the wound was already there, exactly as in the reflection. He didn't get back up. I was alone. The fire spread fast, smoke thickening. The cabin groaned, coughing sparks into the rafters. But the photos didn't burn. They stayed clear, bright, untouched, as if fire itself couldn't touch them. I backed into the corner, coughing, trembling, heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might break. And then I saw it. One last photo. Not on the wall. On the floor, leaning against the leg of the table. I don't know if it had been there all along or if it had just appeared. I forced myself closer, every step heavy. My knees buckled as I picked it up. It was me, sitting in this very corner. Smoke swirling around me. Fire reflecting in my wide, desperate eyes. And a shadow behind me. Not a person. Not something I could name. Just a shape, taller than the cabin itself, arms reaching, hands closing around my throat. I dropped the frame and scrambled back, but there was nowhere left to go. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with smoke. My vision swam. And then I felt it. A weight on my shoulders. Fingers, cold and crushing, curling around my neck. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My hands clawed at empty air, at nothing I could fight. My chest burned, my lungs screaming for air. The fire roared louder, or maybe that was the blood in my ears. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was the wall of photographs. Hundreds of faces staring back. And in the center, a new one sliding into place. Me, my own body, lifeless, eyes glassy. And that's all I remember. When I woke up, it was daylight. The cabin was gone, burned to ash. No photos, no frames, no bodies. Just blackened ground and the smell of smoke. I stumbled down the road until a car found me. They said I was in shock, that I was lucky to be alive. But I don't feel lucky, because I know the truth. The cabin didn't let me go. It's waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I swear I hear it again. The faint creak of a frame shifting on the wall.